Hello everyone, and welcome to this webinar from the Reiki Guild on using Reiki with animals. Those of you who are on the call or listening to the recording who aren't members of the Reiki Guild, just let me tell you that the Reiki Guild is a professional association and community specifically for Reiki practitioners, but it's also a place where the general public can go to find lists of qualified Reiki practitioners and get more information about Reiki. And I've got the website there, reikihealersandteachers.net. If you want to go and have a look and see what else we've got up on that website, please feel free. I will have it up again at the end of the webinar as well, so you don't have to make a mad note of it right now. This evening you've got me, Louise Carden. I'm Secretary of the Reiki Guild, and I'm going to be hosting the webinar tonight, and I'm very pleased to have with me Alison Sanford, who is one of our committee members, but she is also very well qualified in the area of animals and animal Reiki and animal healing. Before we start, I just want to say a little bit about some technical points. If you can't hear us, check that your speakers are on and that you've got no loose connections anywhere. Very often there's a simple explanation for why things aren't working. I sometimes discover my speakers have been put on mute, and last time I did a webinar I completely re-recorded it, but my son had actually put my speakers on mute and the sound was working, so check that. Sometimes our internet or your internet drops out for a few minutes, and you may lose the sound, you may lose the picture, but it generally comes back. You should be seeing a chat box in the top right hand corner of your screen, but if you're watching this on an iPad you may not have this function. You may be able to see the little box, but it may not work for you, although I gather that GoToWebinar have recently made some alterations to allow Mac users more functionality. Now you can type messages into that little box, which I will keep an eye on, or you can raise your hand to attract my attention. There's a little icon that looks like a hand. If you click on that, I can see that you're trying to get my attention. Could we just have a little show of hands to see how that's working? If you can hear me, can you please put your hands up? Looks like everybody.
Louise, if you can hear me, I have still got just a blank page.
Have you? Oh.
Yeah, I've still got just blank. I've tried to reload the page and it hasn't made a difference.
Okay, let's ask everybody else. Is everybody else seeing the screen? Everybody put your hands up. Put your hands down. Can people see the screen? Put your hands up if you can see the screen. Okay. Everyone else can see the screen. Alison, okay. That's a bit strange because...
shall I try clicking out and clicking back in again?
Yeah. I mean, you should see, if everybody else can see it, you certainly should be able to see it. Sorry about this, folks. We do sometimes have some technical hitches. We did do a practice, but this is why we have this this little bit of technical run through just at the beginning. When we did the practice, you saw the screen, didn't you?
Yeah, it was fine, and I saw it when I initially came into it. It's when I sorted out the other page that was open, it seems to have gone off and it says I'm launched already, and it should be fine, but it's saying webinar session should start in a few seconds.
Okay, we'll just see whether it comes up. Okay, I've got a... I'm just going to put everybody's hands down again. We need Alison to be able to see the screen because obviously they're her slides, so we've got an issue if she can't see the slides. Has anything come back up?
No, I'm still at the start screen. Just a second, I'm going to go in through my I'm going to go off for a second and try coming right back in after having shut the browser down completely.
Okay. Okay. One other thing for everybody else on the technical front: if you've got any headphones, you may find them useful. You do get a better quality of sound, and at the end, if we have time for questions, if you want to, I can unmute you and you can ask your questions in person rather than typing them into the chat box.
You have a session running already. You cannot join another session. No.
Okay.
Okay.
Go back to the original session. If you go back to the original session, I'm just going to press something else on mine and see what happens. It's probably going to give you control of the screen, but you may have to bring up the PowerPoint presentation.
Okay, hang on a second. Oh, hang on. Got it. It's all right. Panic.
Okay.
Over.
Okay, that's fine.
Yes.
Okay, we now have Alison back looking at the slides. So you should have the technical information slides, Alison, and it's going right the way down to the bottom to the headphones point. Have you got all those?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Fantastic. So I apologise for that to everyone listening, but things sometimes don't go according to plan. Okay, so we'll now make a start on the nitty-gritty of the presentation. Hopefully there will be time for some questions at the end. By all means, type things in, questions and comments in as we go along. I may or may not be able to pick up on those because it's actually quite difficult to run the presentation and keep an eye on the questions, but I will do my best to do that. But please bear with me if I don't get back to you as quickly as you might like. Okay, so off we go. Now, I want to tell you a little bit about Alison. Luckily, we haven't got video, so you can't see her blushing. Alison has had an affinity with animals from an early age, and this developed as she grew up. She had riding lessons and bought her first horse, or was bought her first horse as an 18th birthday present, and from there she had a lifelong passion for horses. And she actually bred horses on a small scale. She started training her horses and gained an amateur trainer's license under Jockey Club rules. But there came a point when it became clear that if she was going to break through and actually win a race, she would need to buy other horses. And at this stage, Alison's life also began to change. There's a lot of heavy breathing from your end, Alison.
Oh, sorry.
All right. Alison's life also began to change, and it was time for her to walk away from racing. But of course, she learnt a lot more about horses, about herself, and the mindset of horse owners. And in 1996, she began to study complementary therapies, and she began by studying reflexology. She started studying Reiki in 1998 and became a Reiki master in the year 2000. And she began practicing Reiki seriously on both people and animals in 1999, and her work with animals has developed from there. She always sought permission to work on animals from their vet, and in 10 years in practice she's worked on all sorts of animals with a range of conditions. She then began to teach others how to work on animals with Reiki, and she's written her own manual for her courses. She became increasingly aware of various behavioural problems which needed more tools to help their owners to continue the work which had been begun by the Reiki treatments she was giving them. And she found a university course close to home, a Bachelor of Science degree in Applied Animal Behaviour Science and Welfare at Hadlow College, which is a branch of the University of Greenwich. And this course gave her an amazing insight into many aspects of animals apart from their behaviour and welfare. And this includes anatomy and physiology, animal husbandry, evolution, comparative anatomy and adaptation, animal cognition and learning, neuroscience, genetics, applied nutrition, and anthrozoology, which is the study of human relationships with animals. So you'll probably agree with me that this is a pretty impressive course that she's been on. Now, her degree dissertation project brought together Reiki and scientific studies into exploring ways to measure and evidence the effect of Reiki on animals. So Alison has a rare insight into both the spiritual and scientific perspective of animals, and she's also had a book proposal accepted for publication. So I think you'll agree Alison is well qualified to be giving this presentation to us this evening, and I'm sure you will have some questions towards the end. So we'll now going to hand over to Alison. I will be asking her a few questions as we go along. But first we're going to look at the differences between using Reiki with humans and using Reiki with animals. So over to you, Alison.
Well, yes, there's quite a lot of differences, as you can imagine, and as I suspect anybody that's tried working with animals has come across themselves, not least of which, when you're working on a human being, is you have most of the time a lovely controlled environment. You've probably set up your couch in a beautifully cleared room with very gentle music and all the other things that you would love to put in place to enhance your treatment. When you go out to treat an animal, largely you're treating them in their own home, so you may have them in any part of the house, perhaps with other children running around or other animals joining in with the Reiki as well, or perhaps in a stable or a field, or maybe in a vet's or some sort of sanctuary. So to start with, your control of the environment is a lot less. And we'll come on to just how you can help yourself with that later on, perhaps. Reactions of the patient or client, whichever way you like to view them. Humans are pretty much fairly polite. Children perhaps, sort of more exuberant, but largely they will lay there politely and just let you do your thing and what have you. Whereas if an animal is bored or frightened or what have you, they will leave. Simple as, so your subjects may be a little less easy to or a little less cooperative in the whole situation. I think your mindset is slightly different when you're working with animals. I think you have to be extra observant of what's going on and aware of your surroundings and your feedback. Communication is obviously different. You can say to people, well, if anything feels uncomfortable, please just let me know and what have you. With an animal, though, that level of communication totally comes through your behaviour. You also have a third party in this relationship very often, which is the owner or the animal's guardian, keeper, whatever term you'd like to apply to them. Legislation is very different around animals, and we'll look at that later. And also you should be working with veterinary permission when it's anything else than for well-being. And people can decide whether or not you ask their doctor, and obviously there are red flags and symptoms and ongoing conditions which you definitely should consult the medical profession before treating, but generally people will make their own decisions on that. Whereas with animals, you should be asking the vet.
Okay, thanks for that, Alison. We will just look at the legal requirements.
Okay.
That's up there.
What I think I would pick out of this, that you're working with several bits of legislation, some older than others. The Protection of Animals Act, which goes right back to 1911. The 1966 Veterinary Act, and then a separate aspect of the 1966 Veterinary Act as well, that says that spiritual healing, faith healing, and this would include Reiki, and that was recently clarified, is not normally regarded as the practice of a veterinary surgeon, and therefore is permissible. under that Act. What's not specifically mentioned there is the update that happened in 2006, but we'll look at that again. Actually, I think it's on the next slide, Louise, which picks up the 5 freedoms.
That's right. I just wanted to add a bit on there. We did discuss about what it means, veterinary surgeon, when this is being performed for reasons other than well-being. What would you consider that giving Reiki just for well-being would be?
Well, it's very grey area actually, because to be honest, my first question would be, what has caused the owner to contact you to seek a Reiki treatment? If there's been any change in the animal's behaviour, whether it's gone a bit hyperactive, maybe it's gone a bit sluggish, those can be very, very subtle and initial indicators of something potentially, not necessarily, that is a more serious underlying problem. And for preference, and I think actually you should be saying to your clients, see the vet first, get them checked out, because these little things of just being a bit off colour, particularly with animals, and when we're thinking of dogs here that live in a pack, and no, they're not the wolf in your living room anymore. You know, we've got 12,000 years of breeding, you know, since then, but they still have a few little traits, and one of those little traits can be that they will try at all cost to mask pain, illness, to maintain their place in the hierarchy of the pack. So subtle little cues like that, maybe, just maybe, a clue to something more serious, and should be checked out.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Alison. Thanks for that. Here's the 5 freedoms.
These came in, as you can see, out of the 2006 Animal Welfare Act, and were initially applied to farm animals, but they're being extended to domestic and captive animals. And I think as you read through them, you will agree that they are so basic. So basic. When we say freedom from discomfort, including thermal, that's from the animal being too hot or too cold. And freedom to express natural behaviours. Now, in behavioural terms, you can use either very natural things to elicit behaviours, such as maybe a bone for a dog to chew, or you can use more artificial methods to get them to express those behaviours, such as balls or kongs or what have you. So these are bare minimum standards, but I think they are very necessary if you're visiting animals in any capacity, in any environment, to keep in your mind as to, are these being met? Does this animal have freedom from hunger and thirst? Is there somewhere comfortable to lie? Does it have shelter? Freedom from pain, injury and disease, well, you know, are its health needs being addressed? And fear from distress, or freedom from fear and distress. And you know, sometimes that can be as part of living in a pack of dogs, or as a multi-cat household. They may be living in a fair amount of fear and distress, despite, you know, sort of what may seem on the surface.
Yeah. And what do you think a Reiki practitioner should do if it's called out to see any animal, and you know, really we find that these 5 freedoms aren't being met in the conditions that an animal is being kept?
I think you have a range of options. Firstly, of course, it's always best to very gently discuss with the owners anything you see of concern. But certainly not go in there all guns blazing and you're not doing this and you're not doing that. Not helpful. You know, they won't let you anywhere near the animal again. They won't let you anywhere near themselves again. So be gentle and deal with it as professionally as you possibly can.
Yeah.
On one occasion, I was called. I had an appointment, and the circumstances were quite strange. But I turned up to visit a pony. And it was a planned visit. When I got there, the pony was very seriously ill. Very, very seriously ill. Its heart rate was through the roof, its temperature was through the roof, its breathing was through the roof, it had a rash all over its body, it was in a terrible state. And the vet hadn't long left it. And I talked with the owner, and we talked through the options, and we decided together that I would phone the vet and voice my concerns to the state of this animal. The vet stated that he was back in his surgery for the afternoon and couldn't get to the animal for a considerable period. We're talking hours. At which point I asked the vet if he would mind if I called another vet because I thought the situation was sufficiently serious. That vet came out. While he came, I called the pony, but I just hope, I mean, this is where your background knowledge comes in of various animals. I hosed down the pony's legs because I didn't want to put it into shock by hosing or water all over, but hosing down the legs, we managed to cool and calm the pony quite well until the vet arrived, and then the vet took over and did what he had to do. Once the vet had gone and he was satisfied, then I went in and gave some Reiki. And those are two extremes, but they're, you know, and of course you have the backup of the RSPCA if necessary. But generally, the more calmly and gently you proceed with it, most owners are willing to listen to you, and if you voice things in a sensitive way, they'll listen to you. Yeah,
good. Thanks for that. Now we've got a little quote here about domestication, which you've put in there.
I love this. I found this while I was doing my degree, and as you can see, it's come from 1884, and I think it says it all really, that you know you cannot put an animal anywhere. This refers obviously to a horse, but you cannot treat animals as an inanimate chattel, just an object. They must be doing something. They must be occupied, and that is very important. And you know, animals have generally a very increased level of welfare, but sometimes when it goes wrong, it goes very, very badly wrong.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, well, let's have a look at what vets think about complementary therapies in general and maybe Reiki in particular. So what are your views on that?
Well, vets have had, you know, sort of 7 years of training, and I have to say, having worked and done work experience in veterinary surgeries, their reputations are very hard won, and they're very easily destroyed. Now, normally treatments, whether they be drug or whether they be more physical things like physiotherapy, have had years of very rigorous scientific testing before they will come out and say, yes, this thing works. And one of our challenges with Reiki is that actually it's had very little testing with scientific rigor. Yes, I mean, we're in an audience that believes Reiki works. I believe Reiki works. But it's how we measure that and how we can present it to the scientific community, of which vets are members, in order that they will accept that. Very often you find vets themselves have had their own experience of complementary therapies. So inevitably some are very much more open to it than others, but it all happens, I've found, on a very quiet level. And when I was talking to some insurance companies and trying to say, well, why don't you allow Reiki as one of your practices or therapies that can be allowed under insurance purposes, they were very clear. And we may not like it as practitioners that it's merely a spiritual practice, but that's how it's viewed in some quarters. And of course there's client demand, and you know, that's really where the work comes from. People who have had good experiences of Reiki themselves, or perhaps are in stage with an animal and you're their last hope. And you know, all of that happens. But very often vets, if they are requested by the owner to have a practitioner come out, then normally they won't say that, or they will say that the practitioner can come out. So they're open-minded, most of them.
Yeah. So, you know, to get this clear, you know, really, if you are asked to treat an animal with Reiki, you need to make sure that it has been seen by a vet and that the vet is amenable to this happening.
Yeah. I would put it on the level of a professional courtesy for the vet to be asked, and you know, they remain in charge of the animal. The responsibility of the animal remains with them. So it's a professional courtesy to say, you know, is it okay if we work? Feedback by all means, what you think your findings are, but you know, if you treat them with respect and courtesy, you're more likely to get it back.
And of course, especially when we're talking about horses, some of these animals may be very, very valuable animals.
Oh, millions of pounds.
Yeah. So obviously they don't want anybody messing with them.
No.
Okay, well, we're going to have a look now a little bit about what we as practitioners need to do when we are actually working with animals. And we were going to start with looking at professional conduct.
Yeah. As we've already said, request veterinary permission to work, and certainly give feedback to the vet. I would say largely keep your feedback on the level of energetic, because if you start wandering into diagnosis or prescription, you are on a very sticky wicket legally. So if you talk about what you have found energetically, you're fine. Certainly be insured specifically for practice on animals, and obviously, you know, we go through a very good block insurance, which animal practice is included in part of that. So just make sure whoever you are insuring with, you say to them, if you're going to be working on animals, I would say even on, you know, just a friend's level, if you've got practice insurance, then make sure you're covered to work on animals. Certainly wear appropriate clothing, especially steel toe caps around horses, because if you get trodden on, it's gonna hurt. But more to the point, you know, if you're going out with dogs and you're gonna likely to be cuddled up to dogs and cats and get covered in all sorts, you know, you don't need to be going, ooh, I don't want to get my best trousers dirty, thank you. So, you know, smart casual and what you don't mind getting covered in dog hair, cat hair, or anything else that might be going. Coming back to be careful not to diagnose or prescribe, because you're not a vet, and you know, it doesn't hurt to just say to people, I am not a vet, because you haven't done the 7 years training like they have done. So you know, you need to be very careful about that. Make sure you take a case history of all that's gone on, because there is always a strange clue. I take the case of a horse where the person listed all the things that she had done to try and set this horse straight. What she didn't mention was worming, and I I picked up on it and said, oh, you haven't wormed? And she said, yes, of course I've wormed. I'm always worm. I do worm counts and this, that and the other, blah, de, blah, de, blah. And there was no reason to suspect she was not being truthful with me. But as it turned out, the one thing she had forgotten to mention was the one thing it was. And it was a fairly rare form of worms, but it was there. Now, we'll look at that energetically. Why would somebody forget to tell you that something they'd done? So, but anyway, there you go. And observation. Observe, observe, observe. Always, always, always. Eyes, ears, you know, your most valuable tools as to what is going on.
Yeah. Now, I just want to go back to that horse one, Alison, because I would say, you know, she hadn't wormed it, and that was something that really, you know, is outside the realms of what a Reiki practitioner normally would be able to. And you know, you've got a diagnosis there, and the prescription is worm them. How did you deal with that?
Well, I'm as sure as I can be that this person had actually wormed.
Right.
And it's part of the process. If you know, again, what your normal husbandry protocols are for that particular animal, that particular species, that was my kind of horsey head on, saying, right, so you know, and those would be things that I would be looking for in the case history. Now, with dogs or perhaps cats, you're looking for a different set of things, although obviously worming is common to all of them. And it wasn't a diagnosis. Well, no, it was the very sticky wicket.
It is, because it's your knowledge of horses really there, and I think this kind of takes us on to the next slide, which is about training before you start using Reiki on animals.
Absolutely.
So let's just have
Yes, go on, sorry.
Okay, well, I said let's have a look at that. I mean, obviously, you gave a Reiki treatment to the horse?
I gave a Reiki treatment to the horse, and as part of our wider discussion of the management of the animal, you know, there were certain things that kind of said, you know, well, it's not right. But once I said to her, well, you haven't mentioned worming. She said, well, I'll do a worm count again.
Yeah.
When she did the worm count again, and when the vet came and then rechecked the animal, that was when the diagnosis and the prescription was made, because you know, there's things you can flag up as a person with knowledge of.
Yes.
But no, I didn't diagnose it as a worm problem. Because it was just you haven't mentioned worms. Oh yeah, of course I worm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, all right.
And then that was her own initiative that said, I'll do that worm count.
Okay. Well, let's have a look at training and what you think we as Reiki practitioners need to know before we work with animals.
Okay. Well, actually, as it says here, you don't actually need any legal training other than your requirement for your Reiki attunements. But, you know, by contrast, a physiotherapist, a chiropractor, or an osteopath, they are all degree-level qualifications. So you would expect these people, obviously, to have a specialized training, but would have a similar sort of degree of underpinning knowledge as that I've gained through doing my degree. So they certainly would have a very, very good understanding of anatomy and physiology, how the body works, both in health and when it becomes sick, what happens when things go wrong, or what can happen when things go wrong. So I would say if you're going to do this on a serious level, you know, when you do reflexology or when you do massage or what have you, generally people will have a level 3 qualification.
Yeah.
equivalent of an A level. In anatomy and physiology at least, and in their own particular, them with their own particular specialism. So you can go to your local agricultural college, and generally they will run some sort of NVQ level 3 course that will give you some sort of animal management, which will cover, you know, sort of similar things, husbandry, anatomy and physiology, how you feed the animals. And the beauty of it, as you kind of get higher up the learning scale, is you get to choose. They'll give you a topic, such as, say, for instance, the digestive system, but then you choose the animal that you do your project on, your learning on. So you can tailor your course a little bit to the way you want to go. If you've got a good underpinning knowledge and good experience, then you will gain credibility as a practitioner.
Yes.
You know, there's nothing worse than looking at people blankly when they ask you questions. You know, the awareness is very important of your own, of whichever species you choose to work most closely with. People will, you know, sort of love cats, dogs, birds, rabbits. They all have their own specialist adaptations. And you can go into situations where, you know, having a specialist knowledge of a particular animal can give you great insight into what is going on, and also an understanding of when you need to refer on, when you need to refer back to that vet.
Sure.
I mean, just to highlight one, cats are what are known as obligate carnivores. They have to have meat. There are vegans around who try to dispute that, and you can. And there was a point where the vegan society was saying that cats could be vegetarian. They can't. They need taurine in their diet, which now is available in synthetic form in these wonderful energy drinks. But they now say, well, you have to let your cat out into the garden to go hunting and taking wild birds and mice and whatever other species they can catch. That is the way they get their taurine.
Yeah.
So, you know, things like that are very important to know.
Sure.
Awareness of what is normal and what the term is maladaptive behaviour. You may get called in where an animal is, in inverted commas, misbehaving. It's very useful to know whether that behaviour is within that animal's normal range of behaviours, or whether actually it's outside their normal range of behaviour, maladaptive. So it's either developed from a normal behaviour into something that is not healthy. So whether it's a behaviour that is a problem for the owners but actually a normal behaviour for the animal, or whether it's something that is actually detrimental to the animal.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then of course the consciousness level of the individual species. I'm delighted to say that the scientific community, and there is a link at the end of this, has now come out, and this has been ratified by Stephen Hawking no less, to say that animals are conscious. And you know, there's probably a chorus going there going, we knew that. Yes, but the scientific community have taken a humongous leap forward in actually stating that animals are not just sentient, you know, they don't just feel, they are conscious as well, and that level of consciousness depends on the individual species.
Yeah, yeah, very true. Okay, well, let's have a look at the other piece of the equation when we use Reiki with animals, the owners.
Aha, lovely owners, yes. Owners come in all shapes and sizes, of course, and it's really important that as a practitioner and an animal lover that you don't judge the owners. Quite often, if an animal is in trouble, it's because their owners are in trouble in some way, and we must be as compassionate to the owners as we are to the animals, most definitely. Do they themselves need Reiki? And the things that can be quite telling is, you know, what's their relationship with their animal? Sometimes their animal is in charge of them. Sometimes their animal is totally dominated by them. Sometimes, particularly in the horse world, you can find that the owner is totally dominated by the peer pressure that's around them. And of course, as in all walks of life, there are owners who are incredibly spiritually aware and some that aren't. And I guess as a practitioner, what you have to learn to do is, in a sense, just adapt yourself, your behavior, your language into what that person understands, so that you can make the best connection with them that you possibly can, because ultimately it will be for the good of the animal.
Yeah, and this point about speaking their language, Alison, I mean, if you're talking with a horse owner, you need to know what the parts of the horse are called.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Their knees or their ankles or whatever they're called.
Yes, absolutely. You know, and this is where your training will come in, that you will know the points of the horse and the correct terminology, because you will be ripped apart if you do call it their knee. Well, there is a knee on a horse, but if you use the ankles, you know, or that bit over there, you know, you will lose credibility as a practitioner.
Yeah.
Without a doubt, and you know, that is very important.
Mm-hmm. And I've also heard, Alison, that some animals, particularly dogs, can actually take on the ailments of their owners.
Oh, absolutely. I've come across it a lot. Yes. And sometimes, you know, when you're getting into the feedback with the animals, sometimes they're going, yeah, I'm ill. Yeah, I you know, I hurt, but I'm actually far more worried about my owner.
Yeah.
In terms that, you know, you pick up things, but yeah, no, they're worried of the effect of their illness on the owner. And that you obviously you pick up on a very energetic level, and everybody's feedback comes through different ways. But certainly I've found, you know, sort of lumps and bumps in areas that would be comparable to people where they've had lumps and bumps of cancer, or they've had backache, and then you sort of tune into it and go, well, this animal's being a fraud. No, they're, you know, or, you know, you pick up on some of them, and it's come across as a whiplash injury. You say, well, you know, this to me, sort of, and you're not saying it's a whiplash injury, but, you know, the stiff neck, and you sort of energetically, you know, there's elements that feel very, very similar, and the owner says, well, I've got whiplash.
Yeah.
You know, so
we do need to take the owner into account as well.
Very much so. Very much so.
Yeah, and so actually if we look now at actually assessing the animal.
Yeah, definitely your specialist knowledge of the species, whether you're, you know, you're into cats, dogs, birds, reptiles, whatever it is, you know, learn as much about those species, and I would go further, particularly in the domestic animals, into the breeds, because many of the breeds of different, you know, dogs and cats and horses have very different characteristics. You know, in the horses you will meet hot bloods, cold bloods, warm bloods. With the dogs, you know, you meet the collies that are hyper intelligent, and then you meet some of the other breeds where, yes, they're intelligent, but their characteristics, their normal behaviour is perhaps much calmer, much quieter. And these have come about over thousands of years of breeding, and being familiar with how a breed is likely to behave, but the breed characteristics is important, because then you can look at the individual animal, and that will give you some indication of where that animal sits within the breed. Is it a hyperactive example of the breed? Is that telling you a little bit about what's going on? Is it a very, very laid back? Is it acting out of character for itself? also very important. The animal's posture, you know, how it's standing. Does it look like it's up and perky? Does it look a bit sorry for itself? All these different things. You know, is it perhaps a bitch coming into season? Is she feeling a bit grotty because she's coming into season? Is it a dog who can smell a bitch coming into season and he's going a bit crazy because he can't get to them? You know, there's all these different things that can be considered, and of course not to by any stretch underestimate the feedback from your Reiki connection. Very soon into learning to work with animals, I asked to get the feedback and feel in my own body how the animal's feeling. That was a thing I chose. That was a way I chose to work, and it was good for me because then I could describe to the owner how I felt that the animal was, and the feedback from that Reiki connection is just, you know, from a practitioner point of view, the most valuable thing that you can get.
What I'm picking up from this, Alison, is that you may actually be called out to give a Reiki treatment to an animal because the owner believes that there's something wrong with this animal, but in fact what may be being exhibited is actually perfectly normal behaviour for that particular animal. I mean,
occasionally, yes.
Yeah, yeah. So it doesn't mean that the animal wouldn't benefit from a Reiki treatment, but it may be that there's not as much wrong with it as the owner thinks there is.
No, and sometimes your presence and the opportunity for the owner to talk through with you their concerns, for you to shed a different perspective on what may be going on, you know, can be very valuable. Incredibly valuable, and just sitting there in the Reiki space can help bring a calmer atmosphere to the whole household. You know, especially if, you know, there's been an upheaval, someone's maybe moved out or maybe moved in, there's been a change of job or a loss of job, or, you know, all these different factors, and they can upset a household, and the animal can be the barometer of those changes that's going on, and you going in there and helping primarily the animal to relax, and also then to help talk through, because if people can, you know, sort of talk over what's going on with the animal, and inevitably, you know, sort of other bits of information will come forward as well. Just by talking it over in a calm, and somebody who is not entrenched in the situation. I find very often things that are very often so obvious to you as an outsider are completely light bulb moments for the individuals in the house. And I think, again, that's where the Reiki attitude comes in, of being non-judgmental, of understanding that, you know, that being in the thick of a situation and really not being able to see occasionally what may be blatantly obvious. And I think that compassion from us as Reiki practitioners to say, it's all right, we all get ourselves in a mess now and again, but, you know, look, here's another perspective on it. Let's just... And that can cause such a huge shift for somebody to come in who is incredibly peaceful and assured. And again, this is where I come back to how you control your environment, because you control your environment that you work in by being very secure in your own Reiki, in your own self. Because if you can go in there and remain calm, remain in your Reiki space, which I'm sure everybody else has felt. You know, you go into a room perhaps which is, there's more than just the person in it that you're treating with the Reiki, and yet it bounces around the room. The number of extra animals that come in and seek out the Reiki while you're
Yes.
treating one animal
Yeah.
is just incredible. Don't underestimate it, because it is incredibly powerful way to go in and help people.
Yeah. And I think we've actually probably covered most of these in that discussion on this slide. Yeah. Okay, so let's have a look. Observation of the situation.
Okay, this is where I think your awareness has to stay high. And your feedback, as I've already indicated, will come in all sorts of ways. You know, we as practitioners, I guess, we have ways in which we prefer to work and ways in which feedback comes most readily. So I think staying aware of yourself, of the situation, of your feedback is most important. What emotions come up? You know, sometimes it can be euphoria, brilliant. It can be grief, it can be anger, it can, the whole gamut. And it's important to note them and acknowledge them. Is a pain, you know, we get all sorts of pain. Is it sharp? Is it achy? Is it dragging? Is it tingly? Again, this is where I get the feedback in my own body, and it is at a controlled level, because you can always say, take it away if it's not mine. But also being able to describe that ache, whether it's a stabbing pain or whether it's just a dull achy, like similar to what you'd expect to feel if you were feeling an arthritic kind of pain, can be useful to understanding what's going on for that animal. Is the energy too high? Do you feel like you're plugged into the mains? Is it too low? Is there no energy there at all? Is it trapped? Does it flow? And sometimes, you know, you come to a site and you know that there's perhaps the owner's told you a diagnosed problem in that area. Maybe they've got a bad hock or a bad foot or what have you, and yet you go onto that area and you go, oh, I can't find anything here. I'm not getting any feedback at all. And yet you go elsewhere in the body, and all of a sudden you get a huge sense of release, rushing to that point where the diagnosed problem's being. So don't always just act on that one area where there's a known problem. Always consider the whole body, because you're looking at the body energetically, so that you know, is it caused by trapped energy? Is there a trapped energy? And when you do the Reiki, the energy is released so it can flow again. And sometimes people get odd pictures or words pop into their head, which can be useful.
So, I mean, obviously this is critical, Alison, because you're not getting any verbal feedback from the animal, so you've got nothing else really to go on. And I suspect, you know, there are some Reiki practitioners who don't work with energy in quite the same way as this. So, you know, they may not really be ideal candidates for working with animals, because they may not use this energetic, you know, may not have this strong connection to feeling energy in that way.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that I definitely developed, and it's something that even now, if I'm working on an animal, this will all come through much more clearly than if I'm working on a person.
Oh, okay.
Whether that's I'm better adapted to working on animals than people, I don't know. But you know, it's the way.
Yeah.
I think if your desire is to work on animals from a compassionate point of view, not from a business point of view, then you know you will find your way forward.
Yeah. Okay, that's great, Alison. Now we're going to have a look now at some different animals. Mainly, I guess we've been talking about domestic animals, you know, pets, working animals, rescue retired animals, and possibly even valuable animals such as racehorses, show jumpers, pedigreed dogs or cats. But perhaps you could say a little bit about wild animals and how we might work with those if necessary.
This is where I guess your distance Reiki really comes to the fore, and I would also put into that category animals that have suffered severe neglect or abuse, because your presence as a human being may well distress the animal, and it's something you need to be aware of. You may have this very loving desire to help wild animals or captured animals with your Reiki, and you know that's great, and it can be a very good thing to do with them. But, and particularly in zoos where often they try not to handle the animals too much so that they can remain as unhumanized as possible, if that's the right word, your distance Reiki is definitely the way to go. So you may need to be at, you know, in a different place. You can be on the outside of the cage or the enclosure, but actually physically getting your hands on them is possibly not the best idea for them, because you will cause more distress than you relieve, and I think that's very important to keep at the front of your mind.
Yeah, excellent point. Now we've got 3 slides here now, which I think will be of interest to people. We are coming up towards the end, but I'm going to overrun by 5 minutes or so because of the technical issues we had at the beginning. So we are just going to quickly have a look at these slides, which if you could just have a quick run through these for us, Alison.
Yeah, this is my own artwork, haha. So this is the animal chakras. The main difference you'll see here, and this is one, is the brachial major chakra, which Margaret Coates, who's a spiritualist animal healer, discovered, and having done, you know, sort of my own energy feeling, what have you, I think she's right. So I included that in my diagram.
Yeah, and I think when we did the practice, I said to you, Alison, that, you know, a lot of us, that's where we would actually touch an animal,
yeah.
you know, even a dog or a cat. Yeah.
And it's a very useful place to get started, and it's a place where if you can't touch the animal anywhere else, you can work from very successfully. It's a very sensitive point.
Yeah, and I just thought that was a really interesting diagram for people to see. And of course, although this is a horse, it would apply to you know, dogs, cats, pigs, anything standing in that position.
Would come to working with birds, but
yeah,
you know, that's
okay. And then we've got one here of the Meridian system, which is a bit mind-blowing.
Yeah, that's really crowded, isn't it? I think it's. I mean, obviously you have lots of different points around it. I think it's interesting just to note from the point of view of where I was talking earlier about the energy flowing and feeling it flows from a point to a point. Awareness of the meridians, I think, will help you understand where the energy is flowing to and from, and where it goes through. So yeah, good one to have a look at later.
Yep. Of course, if you will all have access to the recording of this webinar, so you can look at these pictures again later. And then you've got this Shin Jyutsu.
Jyutsu, yes, I came across this a few years ago, but what I like about this drawing is where all the red dots are were pretty much all the places that I would put my hands anyway while I'm working around the animal. Perhaps I wouldn't do the underside of the hoof, depending on how I had assessed the energy levels and the animal safety-wise, because obviously that's an important thing to keep in mind. But pretty much that can be very useful for at least a starting framework of where to place your hands.
Yes, and you've got those 3 very close together, 3, 10 and 9, which seem to correspond with that brachial major chakra again, so that does seem to be
absolutely. And when I was dowsing, when I was dowsing energy centers, and this long before I knew about these Jinshin Jyutsu, they had come up much to my confusion, but there you go, they're explained.
Yeah, no, that's great. And so we've got a slide here about the influence of Reiki on the energy systems.
Yeah, just keep in mind that all of them is influenced because Reiki, you know, doesn't have boundaries as such. I've had Shiatsu practitioners saying definitely that after a Reiki session the meridians have been rebalanced. So just keep that in mind, but also keep in mind that, you know, the neurological system, because energy flows along that, you know, in its own way. It's a form of electricity. It's a form of energy running through the neurological system. So there's a whole nother conversation there.
Okay, that's good. Well, we're just coming back to the end of what we can get through in the time. This is obviously a huge subject, and when we did the practice we were well over an hour, so we have actually cut out some of the things that we had planned to tell you. So I've got a recommended reading list here, some of the things that Alison has recommended. We have got some research papers on the Reiki Council website, and a couple of books there. Is there any one of those books that really stands out for you, Alison, that would be a good starting point?
Oh, wow. I would say The Emotional Lives of Animals, Mark Beckhoff. Fabulous gentleman, researcher, scientist of animal behaviour, cognitive ethologist, I think he terms himself. But an amazing book in terms of, yeah, just what animals are capable of and the connections that we can make with them. So yeah, definitely a gentleman worth looking at.
Excellent. Okay, now that's the end of the formal presentation. Now, if after the webinar you have some burning question that you wish to be asked, you can actually contact Alison via the Reiki Guild office, and those of you that are members have access to that. I've got the website down there again, so you can also contact the office through the website. If you're a Reiki Guild member, we do have a Facebook page, but we need to know if you want to join that Facebook page. It's a closed group, so you'll need to tell one of us, ask one of us to join you into it. But Alison can be found on there as well. So I'm just going to allow about 5 minutes for questions if there are any, because we had that technical problem at the beginning. So you can either type your questions into the questions box, or you can raise your hand and I can come and see you. Okay, I see there's a question. Can we have a copy of the slides, please? Well, you'll have a copy of the entire presentation coming out to you, so you'll be able to look at it all over again. So let's see if anybody's got their hand raised. I'll quickly flick through there. Can't see anybody. I've answered that one question that was on the sheet. Okay, last chance if anybody's got any questions. Oh, hang on, I found another one. How did Alison start her practice on animals? Did she start with friends, etc.? Alison.
Yes, I did, pretty much. I was doing case study for various other things, and yeah, people who had kindly lent me their bodies as guinea pigs start to let me work on their own animals, and obviously I worked on my animals as they were at the time. So yeah, good way to start building.
Excellent. Let me just have another quick look. Here's another one. How successful is Reiki? Which means for how successful is Reiki for arthritis in cats? Have you any experience of arthritis in cats?
Some. I guess you're looking on a level there where actually daily treatments would be ideal. So after an initial, providing obviously they're you know, sort of the vet's good with this, because it's a, you know, it's a proper veterinary condition, then perhaps the owner would consider being attuned to Reiki, because it's a regular thing. But
Yeah.
one of the big things that, one of your biggest considerations as a practitioner, and one of what they have found, a lot of the research, is that if you reduce stress, you reduce perception of pain. So if an animal and or a person is stressed, and they may be stressed because they're in pain, but if you can relax them, and above all, Reiki is so relaxing and rebalancing of the nervous system, you reduce the perception of pain. So don't underestimate its value in that respect at all.
Yeah. Okay, well, a question here about insurance. Can you recommend an insurance group who would recognise an equine Reiki practitioner?
We insure through Zurich, is it?
Well, Balens are the
Reiki Guild?
broker.
Balens, yeah. Oh yes, of course. Yeah, so I would direct you to Balens, the guys that we use.
Yeah, I mean, most insurance companies, insurance brokers can design, you know, a policy that will do what you need it to do, really. That's how most insurance works.
I think particularly with horses, you need to be aware of the value of the horses that you're working on, because they put limits on which may seem, you know, sort of a fabulous amount, $500,000, but if you get a very successful racehorse or show jumper or eventer, you can be looking well beyond that in terms of value.
Yeah.
You would need to be covered for that.
That's right. So this is going to be the last one. Adrian's got a hand up, so I'm just going to unmute Adrian, so I hope she's got a microphone. Are you there, Adrian?
Yes, I am. The question I have, would she consider doing the neurological one that she said is another issue altogether?
Oh my goodness. Thank you, Adrian. Love you. Yeah, I'd have to think about that for a while in terms of what I said. Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, okay. Right, thanks, Adrian. Well, I'm going to close you off now. That's the end of the questions. If you do have any other questions, you know, by all means, email the Reiki Guild office and we'll pass questions on to Alison. I did check beforehand that she would be happy to answer questions, so I did get her permission to say that in the first place. So thank you very much for coming this evening. We've had quite a good number of attendees on here this evening. This is part of a series. The Reiki Guilds have decided to do these webinars to make us more accessible to our members who are spread out all over the country. So keep your eyes open for another webinar in a couple of months' time. I'm going to stop the recording now, so thank you very much for coming this evening and hope to see you again soon.